Well, let me start by saying good evening and welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. Today we have another red-green dialogues that, as you know, are possible thanks to the support of the Green European Foundation, our partner in Europe, who allow us to undertake these events. And today, the reason for this first debate is to, getting out of the hyper-election climate we're living in, to be talking for some time, and, talking about democracy, no more, no less, the state of the art in democracy, and trying to find a interesting title. Well, we had another title, Democracy and Its Enemies, and they said, well, these four guys are the enemies of democracy. No way, no, that was a misunderstanding. They are allies. You guys are allies. You support democracy, actually. We have four people who you probably know, and that I will now introduce, but that can give us a nice snapshot about democracy and the complex and dangers that democracy lives. Let me introduce Pablo Simón, politologist and professor of Carlos III in Madrid, analyst and rather well known on TV and etc. He's an expert in electoral systems, parties, and participation, with a quite interesting book called The Modern Prince. Thank you for being here, Pablo. Brief CVs, because we could be talking a lot about your CVs. Tina, Cristina Monge, can you hear me? Yes? She's in Mexico now. She's not here. I can hear you. I can hear you. You're in Mexico. Good morning. So not good evening. Good morning. Thank you very much for being here connected. We know you made an effort. Tina is a teacher at Zaragoza University. She's a politologist, as I said. She's an analyst in different media. She's written books, but her last book, her interesting book, is called After the Indignation, after 15M. She will contribute with her perspective. We have also Eudald Espluga. He's got a degree in Espluga and a master in sociology, the author of a book, and the book is called Don't Be Yourself. And we have many politologists. Maybe we should bring someone from another sector who has something to say about democracy. And if you read that book, you realize that this book connects from a different innovative vision and perspective, the dangers of democracy connected to a modern capitalism and the paradigms that are supposed to be modern that have a lot to do with a capitalism and the disequality. And Gwendoline, thank you for being here. Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield is an MP from the Greens. She's a member of different commissions in the European Parliament. But she's here because she's the speaker of a group that follows and well, takes care of the role of Hungary in the European Union. Her European dimension is very interesting. We know that there are behaviors in different states that are dangerous for democracy, like the case of Poland and Hungary as well. So this is the end of my presentation. Let me give you the floor. We'll have time to intervene. Thank you, Gwendoline, for being here with us. And Pablo, you had the floor. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me in, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'll speak Spanish because my concepts are clear in Spanish, my mother tongue, but you can talk to me in Catalan as you please. Well, to try to summarize in 10 minutes the amount of ideas that I would like to convey, I will summarize everything in 5 different points. And I would like to make a first warning. When I talk about democracy, I will talk about the actually existing democracies, not democracies in normative terms or in terms that what we aspire to be as a democracy. Our democratic systems, and there is a terminological democracy terminology. Well, these are the terms that of countries that fought against fascism, and this comes from the classic Athens of this 5th century before Christ, with what we have now. And what we have now is more similar to Hamilton's music show than to Pericles, because our systems are liberal democratic systems. Our systems are born in the 18th century, and they are essentially born after the liberal revolutions, and liberal revolutions contain a curious paradox. These liberal cases come from big ideas, equality, fraternity, etc., and freedom, but they are oligarchic regimes. They are born when our representative systems were created, as systems that replace the old regimes and place in the center the nation. And the healthiest element of nation, the owners, those that choose the governments. And what first thing that we do is to divide power and generate constitutions and bodies that limit the mandate of of rulers. But this is where we had the hard work. To reach our current system, we had to start from that starting point and, little by little see the evolution, who participated in the election of those representatives. And there is where we have the workers' movement during the 19th century, fighting for the expansion of the vote, women that come with the universal voting right, but in many other places, ethnic groups didn't have their rights recognized, as in the case of civil rights in the US in the 1960s. It's very important to keep this in mind, because our systems are connected with both poles. The liberal pole, on the one hand, we really care that power is controlled, that is distributed amongst different agents with an inspiration of the classical liberals. But at the same time, we have the liberal democratic pole, mandates supported on majorities, and we have two principles that sometimes may collide. And what can I tell you that you do not know? Well, this is a starting point that is relevant also to understand that our systems are not perfect. Our systems are based on certain evolutions that in any case have this paradox. They stem from universal principles, but also an effective element keeps us at unrest, because we feel that this generates political action. That's why we've seen so many struggles during the 19th century. This is my first idea. Second idea, political systems required legitimacy, which is consent. We accept that a government is fair, and the decisions are made that are made by the government are fair. What are the sources of legitimacy of a government, no matter if it's democratic or authoritarian regime? Classical authors said that they have two types. One is specific, and the other is blurred. Specific legitimacy is the legitimacy of an instrumental origin. I accept the government because it gives me good results, it performs. This for dictatorships is very important, because they know that their rules are not better than those of a democracy, but they require to remember or remind us 40 years of peace, so many dams were built. Well, at least you have to accept that I do a good job. That's why dictatorships are very vulnerable to economic crisis, because then you realize that dictators don't give good economic results. Fortunately, in democracies, we've been able to build a system of legitimacy where we say, listen, maybe my government or my system is not yielding good results. Maybe you are not satisfied with the Spanish democracy, but this is not doesn't make me anti-democrat. This, well, I may use a part of my government that I can get rid of, but a dictatorship cannot. We learned during World War II that was very relevant. Looking at political economics, we have to look at the material, the situations of political systems so that they are stable. This is a lesson that is fundamental. Why was the welfare state built in Europe? This was built in the Second World War. They were looking at the Soviet Union. Well, they had to learn what took fascism to governments. This was learning that we didn't have in the previous European crisis, and now we do have it. So if you want a political project that is sustainable in time, the material element, the legitimacy of an instrumental nature is also relevant. This is something that is important, particularly in our democracies, because we accept a fiction, which is the equal influence. We can all have a final influence in a similar proportion. Well, we have vote. We have vote because my vote and Ana Patricia Botin's which is a banker, have the same weight. But when economic unbalances exist, the political imbalances exist as well. It's difficult, it has a difficult solution, but it erodes political systems. Third idea, and I think I'm using my time wisely. Since 1981, the planned economy, the real socialism in the Soviet Union collapses, and we only have a game to play that is market liberal economy and representative systems as in the Western world. Evidently, this is not the case, because even if we have capitalism, we see that there are different models of capitalism. We have the liberal capitalism, which is basically what we have in the West, and state capitalism, what they have in China. And we wonder if we have to play the same game as they do. But we've seen many authoritarian steps back inside and outside of the Soviet Union. The nationalist and connection in both Poland and Hungary. But countries like Russia, China, and India, that are big world powers, are considering that the liberal democratic values are not even relevant for their functioning. And this is a real novelty, because when the US was the big hegemonous power, and when we were in that situation, you could say that that the US was not behaving if their action considered their actions were going against their values. I could say that they went against the principles of liberal principles when they invaded Iraq. What kind of tension can I generate when they invade Taiwan, when they never accept my values? So we are going to a different situation. And now we'll talk about enemies, but this is combined in a context of crisis of the representative bodies. I think that beyond how our democracies work, we see a recycling of the agents that work in democracies. Since the 1970s, unions, parties, churches lose affiliation, lose affluence, they vertebrated in interest, not anymore, and the lack of trust is visible in the mass media. Everyone is atomized, everyone is not trusting the rest. This is due to structural reasons and reasons of the ages. We have structural reasons. The infrastructure of communication has changed. You don't have parties that go from the beginning to the end. People are more literate, they are more critical. This is unavoidable. Well, the toothpaste is out of the tube. You cannot put it back. But then the agents themselves, they have something to say. This is not God-given. Many agents, this also decided to follow the path of, accepting passively this loss of social capital. We have active campaigns so that the role of unions or associations is negated. It's not. Well, here we have a struggle of power. This has to be explicit. And with this, I reach my final point. That is what I want to talk about. Who are the enemies of democracy? Once we are not, we realize we are not the enemies of democracy. When identifying the enemies of democracy, I would do that on two axes. On the one hand, we have exterior enemies and internal enemies. External and internal enemies call different systems of criticisms. External enemies are non-democratic states. They use a fundamental idea, efficacy. Authoritarian systems are sold as more efficient than democratic, managing the crisis, generating growth, helping the inclusion of their population. They say democracies are slow, generate inequality. They are very tortuous. We, with big data, we with severe decisions, will be able to better manage society. And this is accepted in some areas of our society. Well, we have many admirers of China. They are sold with the management of COVID-19 as well, they were sold as superior managers of COVID-19. They said they perform, they are very efficient. Others are inner enemies who are financed by the external enemies. And I'm speaking about radical right-wing sites that they said the problem is not a problem of efficacy, but a problem of representation of voice. We have plutocratic, capitalistic elites, wokes, etc. You call whatever, different types of rhetorics that kidnapped the political, the popular will. They are not. I can represent you. I can include you in the system. Those popular classes, workers, that the traditional left wing is not representing anymore. So instead of performance, they say, well, procedure is the right way to do. Is the right way to go. How can we generate a better representation? Electoral volatility, difficulties when creating a government, polarization. As far as I'm concerned, all these elements are byproducts of those two adversaries. So sometimes I have a personal opinion that sometimes we take the carrot by the leaves. We care about fake news, but this is a byproduct, a strategy stemming from those other problems, that is efficacy and performance and procedure. If we want to defeat our enemies, these are the two dimensions: systems that do work, and to achieve democratic systems that work, we have to talk about reform administration, how to generate better equity, better public services, etc., and procedures, how to make those people that don't feel represented participate from the system, exploring new ways, not only through traditional actors, rethinking many participation strategies locally to reduce the space that those enemies of democracy have. 10 minutes sharp. Thank you, Pablo. Tina, your turn from Mexico. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Wonderful. Well, good morning, and thank you for your kind invitation, and my apologies because I really wanted to be there. But some months ago, a date appeared in my life, and that is a congress of a full week where I am right now, organized by UNAM, which is entitled Humanity Threatened, Who's in Charge of the Future? And we'll see similar things to what Pablo just said, and that the things that we will hear during the session. And I say this because it's good to take good note of it, because debates such as what we are observing today are also existing in different parts of the world. We have an awareness, the fact that around our democracies and our ways of life, etc., we have some threats. Why do we have that idea? Well, I believe that basically because of two different things. First of all, Pablo said it very well. We are at the moment where formerly more people in the world live under a supposedly democratic system. This means that everything goes as a democracy. We admit octopus as a company, as a pet, for example. This is a game of words in Spanish. But when we analyze what criteria a system has to follow to be considered democratic, or if we talk about the quality of democracy, which is a different thing, then we'll see that things are not so. But the idea of democracy sometimes is devaluated. Secondly, well, we live at a moment in history where big macro trends sketch new disruptive possibilities. If we ask in the room, who do you think are the main trends that move the world? We'll be talking about the digital revolution, climate crisis, and what should be an eco-transition. We'll talk about eco-politics and the movement of people through the world. Each one of these elements on its own, of their own, but they are interrelated in one way or another, have a disruptive potential of a big magnitude. These are not incremental changes. They are not small transitions to improve a system, but rather the potential that each one of them has is a total disruption in our democratic system.
Creo que eso está en la base de que nos sintamos amenazados.
Being threatened as democracies. or as democratic systems or liberal Western democracy, which is the most adequate term. From there, I coincide with many of the things that Pablo just said and that we will talk about. But I would like to point out some of the things that I believe are fundamental. First of all, democracies currently are unable on their own to face those challenges, climate change on the one hand, and reviewing any newspaper will reflect discrepancies in the political parties' programs or sustainable development are not developed at all. We also have the feeling of being facing situations of enormous complexity. I'm sick of saying this. Climate crisis and eco transition are so complex. They incorporate so many elements of a political nature, geopolitical nature, etc., all at all levels. They require deep transformation. We are not at a moment of small changes. Rather, we are at a moment of big transformations, and we feel unable to change. That the first element that makes us feel unable to react is uncertainty. If we think that the big elements that we see that dominate the current scene have a disruptive nature, and many of them are so absolutely new. We've never faced such a climate crisis as what we have right now. Digital revolution is a different story, but climate change is uncertainty, 100% uncertainty. The next step will generate many doubts. We don't really see how the path evolves. This generates unrest and uncertainty. Secondly, as I said before, the complexity of things. If we gather uncertainty plus complexity, right at the moment of big challenges with disruptive changes that democracies don't have the awareness of have good instruments to manage, will lead us to that conclusion. This is generating a situation of inability to face the challenges, fear and unrest and uncertainty. As far as I'm concerned, right at the base of it all, there's the problem of governance. But I'll say that at the end of my presentation. First of all, so we speak about the enemies of democracy because the idea of democracy is being devaluated because we feel threatened. Considering a global standard with many access with a big disruptive capacity that due to an uncertainty situation and complexity, we believe that we don't have good instruments to govern them, to be able to manage them. From there on, we can talk about more specific themes. Pablo very well talked about the legitimacy is consent in democracy, but consent and acceptance in democracies and in the democratic evolution are very difficult to manage because voting once every 4 years and then just step back is not good enough anymore. There's an excellent interview from Daniel Deblat, a book called Asimov on Democracies. He says democracies are born with an economic promise of equality. If that egalitarian promise is not fulfilled, it's very difficult for the democracies that are very demanded because it's the basis of legitimacy. Maybe they won't be able to give an answer. We have to place this in the area, in the sphere of liberal democracies with the before and an after of the financial crisis. Other elements we have from there on came from the past. But to tell you the truth, this is the moment where we know that the economic promise of equality is not there anymore. I coincide with Pablo. When we talk about the increase of populism, when we talk about polarization, which is the super topic of big popularity, when we talk about it all, we cannot reach this point without analyzing them all. If we don't realize that there was a promise that was unfulfilled, well, there's a question that stems from it all, that always comes in this debate. In all this context with great complexity, democracies are aware of the fact that we have problems to manage these elements. Besides, there's been a before and an after of the financial crisis that make things more difficult. The crisis of representation, crisis of the intermediate organs. When we talk about this type of a crisis, we refer to political parties, mass media, fundamentally, but there is a key element, which is the civil society, which is in the second side, in the second line, but it's an agent of intermediation for like this. Like this is very important. We have to think about the role that should be played by civil society. When we analyze all these elements, all of a sudden we see if populism of the far right are endangering democracy. And there is a part of analysts who say very correctly, well, maybe even if this is a populism of extreme right, they reach power. They are limited by economic constraints, political constraints. Well, it's very difficult for them to change things or fulfill their promises. All this analysis is right, I think, because if you study in full detail what are the effects of ultra-right governments when they reach their institutions, they are not half of what they were supposed to be promising in their electoral campaigns. But now, when Meloni considered the situation with immigrants, there were some legal problems, but it's a step forward in the measure that when she shows that she's willing and ready to question consensus that democracies are based on. And when we question the consensus of democracy, sometimes we cannot break away from all of them. But what we are doing is to put some obstacles to the new generation of new consensus that will allow us to accept the challenges and face the new challenges that society poses. So the ultra-right populism sometimes can uh, be disruptive, but it will not allow the levels of agreement that makes us face the new challenges. And if democracies don't advance, if they don't progress, they regress. Digital revolution, climate change, all the elements that we observed require consensus and levels of agreement that allow us to govern, to rule. If they are unable to do so, well, democracy will not progress. And if it's not progressing, it's regressing, as I said. Let me finish because that you know that I don't like to finish without giving some lines, some answers to allow us to manage the situation. Four elements. We need a democracy that is based on governance of anticipation. We need to anticipate what is coming. We don't excessive instruments to be able to manage things. Secondly, in this anticipation and considering the complexity of all these challenges, governance has to be based on elements that have to do with co-creation, with the generation of multiple complicities. There's no government that can manage the whole thing on its own, not even an investment fund. But we need to develop all these levels of governance to generate consensus. All these challenges, on the other hand, require agreements and deep changes. They either are done on a win-win basis or they will not happen. Economic transition, and that's a clear case. What is happening with the generation of movements against renewable energies in some territories? For example, so we need to reach agreements that are a win-win situation for all the actors, for all the stakeholders. And fourth and final point, I believe we have to have a humble and an intellectual, honest attitude. Climate change, well, we've never faced such a threat and a challenge. In the rest of elements, well, we could talk about that more or less. So this is the first time we're doing this, and we don't really know how to manage things. And if you don't know how to do things, you have to test, trial and error, and have a full commitment of continuous evaluation. You test what works and what doesn't work. And there are some things that work, others don't work so much, and others don't work at all. But just by evaluating, we'll be able to how to improve or how to change things in some other cases. So this is another element for debate so that we can later on continue. And thank you for your interest. Thank you, Tina. Eudald, you had the floor. First of all, I would like to thank, can you hear me? Yes? I would like to thank you for inviting me, for sharing this panel. And I will try to, as Mark said, I come from a different discipline. I will get out of the how things were approached till now, but we share a concern that is uh, determine who is the enemy of democracy, even if some people that we are. And I would like to focus on one element that little by little I'll be able to offer information to a more generic debate, as Pablo and Cristina said, because I believe that there are two fundamental elements when we observe which is one of the big enemies of democracy. If we do it in a generational approach, the lack of happiness, the unhappiness that can lead us to political actions when you add it up in a context of inequality. This can generate political non-affection, and this enemy, this tiredness, boredom. Uh, some people talk about mental health. We have to think about how to politize the unrest. How can we politize the unrest so that they do not become a threat to democracy? Because we can say if we don't politize them, unrest will be politicized by others. And this could summarize with many figures published in the last few years, considering that 60% of Spaniards are depressed, fearful, and sad, according to one of the latest reports published in Spain. And after the pandemic, there's been an increase of 250% the suicide attempts amongst the youngest. But this unrest, if it's not politicized, well, we run the risk of reaching a rationale that is totally depolitizing, because this tiredness, this fatigue is not just a physical or mental unrest, but it's a feeling of impotence that goes beyond, and that has structural causes. There's a physical called Schuhan that treated this very well, the society of tiredness. He talks about how society of hyper performance in the framework of inequalities generated by the neoliberal regimes after the fall of real socialism in the 1990s, and this supposed end of the story, where there was some decision imposed on a macroeconomic and political basis that had to do with delocation, deregulation, with a set of elements that deepened into the world of social inequalities in democracies. Well, that generated also a change in the way of subjectivizing subjects. They could see themselves as their own entrepreneurs that had to take this imperative of performance that Pablo talked about when talking about referring to the external enemies. And I'm, going to digress from my line of thought. Mark Fisher, the theoretician from the UK, opened up during, or for many, for a long time ago, a page of memes. He tried to question the idea that this capitalism was at least bad, but at least it worked. And he was adding images of vending machines that were broken. And he said capitalism is bad because this generates inequality and it doesn't work. And that was the kind of a rationale he was talking about. But going back to what I just said, the idea of the entrepreneur of his or her own, as Michel Foucault talked in the 1980s, who was one of the first people to understand the neoliberal system with these economic, political, and material conditions as a way of subjectivation. Well, how this created this imperative of constant production and self-optimization of individuals that generate this unrest that we were talking about before, as mentioned before. And oftentimes, we've seen that in the generational key. You've seen many books and articles that were published. One of the most and best known has to do with Adam Peterson. He says, I can know more. He talked about this tiredness under a millennial key. He said that this was a kind of tiredness that generated an impotence for political actions and for your daily actions. This person said that in your daily life you felt overdone simply by answering an email or messages in your cell phones. Small tasks in our daily lives we cannot even work on, and this generates an impotence, this not being able to do things, because little by little this generates a scenario of political disaffection amongst the youngest particularly. But I wanted to use this idea of fatigue as the enemy of democracy, to take it to the field of Rosy Braidotti from Italy. The writer, this concept of took this concept of fatigue and made a proposal, a critical proposal, a multi-scalar proposal in her book, the Post-Human Knowledge. She talks about different types of fatigue, forcing language. This will help us understand how we are living a paradigm of political danger and the menace against democracy, not only an individual phenomenon that we have to approach in our daily activities, going to therapy, or taking individual solutions. Since I am very uptight and very anxious, I just download a mindfulness app, and I will use 10 minutes to relax, and then I will be able to cope with the rest. What Rosy Braidotti did was to make a list. She talks about economic fatigue. I'm not going to talk about this. Poverty, precariousness, which is not the same. Temporality, low wages, difficulties to access housing, economic fatigue, the imperative of a case such as when we workers are forced by being the soldiers that are 24 hours serving a capital that is not sleeping, going from stock exchange markets from country to country, and this imperative is not changing. This requisite of workers that the workers do have, and Votan's Kichapero with the new spirit of capitalism. There's also a very interesting idea, as Cristina said, how the economic fatigue is transferred to the capacity of movement of subjects, because Voltans and Schiapello talk about the possibility of displacing, going physically, or the impossibility of going physically, or deciding to have to decide about whether or not moving. Who can move? Who will you be doing it by force, by need? This is the first economic fatigue, and she talks about a fatigue of theories. It's a matter of questioning all the academia of the intellectual thinking and any kind of abstract reasoning as a critical reaction by a false materialism closely connected to the new movements of the far right. As Pablo said, the left wing, the different considerations. There is a kind of a reaction against the thinking of the French theory of the 70s, and the thinking coming from the postmodern thinking that is questioned by a materialism that is opposing to this need of going back to certainty, to certainty that is prior to this transformation of mid-20th century. Talks about democratic fatigue, and here obviously it's a matter of what we just heard before, a crisis of representativity. And for me, there are a few things that exemplify it, as well as Pablo said before. There was a viral video which showed a lady talking about the need of in Spain having, well, Spain needs a captain. She said that we have to go back to this nostalgic rationale. But I thought it talks about the technological fatigue, and it's interesting to mention, as Cristina said, that there is a change in the context of the new digital world, not seeing or not approaching it from a perspective focused and centered in what's happening in the digital economy, but rather how the digital economy is correlated to the current neoliberal system. It's important not to talk about digital economies, but capitalism of a platform, understanding that what is happening in our world is what's happening in our platforms with our lives, no matter what is the use of our professional personal life with, using this, for example, Airbnb, the price of your rent will go up no matter if you use this. We can work with Uber or many other companies. It's important to work uh, and talk about this technological fatigue. It has to do with the democratic fatigue that we have, that we live in our society. The concept of fatigue that Berardi uses, this is not so mysterious, is the eco fatigue. It has to do with the fatigue of our planet, with listening or using all the resources and the lack of horizons in that context of planetary exhaustion. She then talks about the humanism and the humanistic fatigue, and she talks about how can we politicize our fatigue. And this leads me back to the beginning of my speech. This unrest should not turn into a threat that takes us away from participant, from our commitment, and so that we should lead us to defend our passions, our rage, our need to offer answers. And to finish, I wanted to talk about two important threats. One, as Mark Fisher said, to eliminating the privatization of stress, of unrest. We live in a space where we have to manage the inequalities and the unrest generated by inequality, not only individually, but also collectively, and also the growth of nostalgic ideas connected to the new movements of radical, neoconservative, radical, extreme right. Interesting to see it as a reaction to neoliberalism. Short ago, a book was written by Belinda Cooper, Family Values, where she makes a genealogical process to explain how the current neoconservative and neo-fascist trend stems from the same common root with neoliberalism, because it puts the family responsibility not only individually, right at the core of it. And it's very interesting to see how all this cultural victory that is being generated of nostalgic narratives dressed or disguised as the old values going back to your grandparents' town, things were clear, etc. Obviously, this is what Melinda Cooper is trying to explain. What is happening is going back to neoconservative discourses and ideas. So putting fatigue right at the core serves to see that these are two very clear dangers, to determine how this unrest can be politicized in different ways. And depending on the political view we have on this unrest, we'll end up with individualized solutions that taking us far from political solutions. Or maybe we can find answers to articulate collective answers, democratic answers to the unrest. And well, this is it. If we have time, we'll continue. Thank you so much. Gwen, your time now has come. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It was not easy to listen to you at the same time as the interpretation, so I'm not going to be as capable as I usually do to react to what was said, but I did get a few things. First, I would like to present myself. So I'm Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield. I'm a member of the European Parliament in the Green Group, the fourth group in the European Parliament, and I'm from the French. I work generally on rule of law issue, civil rights, liberties, but also discrimination, constitutional questions, issues for the future of Europe, and gender issues. So that's the whole package. And more specifically, I am the rapporteur of the Parliament on the situation of Hungary. This means that I really speak on behalf of the Parliament about Hungary, and I am the person supposed to follow on the Article 7 procedure. I will come back to this, and to to monitor what is happening in Hungary on a European point of view, and to try to push Commission and Council to act on what is happening in this no more complete democracy, as we have stated it. So as you, the rule of law issue, I mean, first, it's interesting maybe to have a definition of it. What Commission, the European Commission consider rule of law, which is a very Anglo-Saxon concept, is indeed democracy. It's also basic democracy, so not really effective democracy. It's basic democracy. You just need elections. It's anti-corruption tools in the country. So if you have a system to fight anti-corruption, it's independence of judiciary, and it's media pluralism. We in Parliament, in front of this definition from the Commission, we always add also fundamental rights. So that is a very important fact to know, that for us, Parliament, when fundamental rights are attacked, minorities are attacked, we don't consider that there's rule of law anymore. And I also nowadays always insist on the fact that we should add effective democracy, because what we are seeing more and more in different parts of the world, but also in European Union, is democracy that only exists through the process of an election which is so manipulated that we already know at the end what the result will be, but there is still an election, but it means that democracy is not effective. Rule of law state in European Union is in a very paradox situation, I would say. On one hand, we are very aware of it, which was not the case 10 years ago. We work on it. We have a close look to what is happening. We all remember a time where European Union was only talking about deficit and debts and structural rules for money and all of this, and how on the Greek situation, what if democracy was functioning or not, if fundamental rights were there, if rule of law was there, we didn't care. European Union was just about the structural financial situation of Greece. So on this, we have had a progress, you could say, because now you have a report on rule of law made every year by the European Commission, which will look at all of the countries and will even make recommendations. And these reports are becoming better and better. They were very weak at the beginning. It's the third year now, and it's much better. And it looks more and more like a rule of law report coming from the Council of Europe. So it has increased in content and in recommendation, but it's still not as good as we would like to, but still there's been some work. And now you don't have, I would say, every month in a plenary of the Parliament in Strasbourg, you won't have a moment where we will not discuss the rule of law situation of one country, the democratic situation of one country. So on this, we've had progress. But on the other hand, of course, we've had this huge deterioration in specifically two countries, Poland and Hungary. In both cases, the European Union decided to trigger Article 7 of the treaties, the procedure on Article 7. In Hungary, you probably know that the situation started deteriorating immediately in 2011, 1 year after Viktor Orban came back to power and became prime minister again. And since 2011, people in this parliament have been alerting on the situation. There were resolutions in 2011, 2013, 2014, 15, 16, until Parliament realized that Commission and Council were not acting, and it was already so bad. And so we triggered Article 7. Now, this has not made that many progress. We've had some progress. We've had hearings of the country by the other countries, which was a first act. Now we would need recommendation. We are very, very far from the sanction moment, which is in the Article 7. It's point 2, but it seems completely today unrealistic for most of the member states to judge one of their peers, even if the situation is so bad. And also we've had, because of this Article 7 procedure, we've had consequences in other domains. And one of them, the most well-known one, is that now the funds coming from European Union, the cohesion funds, will be submitted to a sort of a rule of law criteria. It's little, but it does exist. And for the moment, Hungary and Poland haven't had a number of their funds. Neither have they had the recovery fund because of the rule of law situation. That being said, it has not prevented Hungary to go further and further. And so now not only there's been this constitutional coup and the way the parliamentary works is no more democratic, the elections are no more completely democratic, there's no media pluralism, there's absolutely no independent media that manages. They do exist, but they don't manage to get to the people. The Budapest mayor, you have to have this in mind, the Budapest mayor, since his election in 2020, has had 5 minutes on national TV, 5 minutes, and that sort of thing. You never hear about the opponents. You've got less and less independence of justice, and you have huge attacks on a number of people that are the ones that the government will choose as an enemy for 6 months. So they've had a few years. There were the migrants, there were the Roma. Of course, there's a bit of anti-Semitic with the anti-Soros, George Soros rhetoric. There has been the LGBTI most in an increased way since 2019-20. It's been really them, the target of attacks. There's also been a few of a gender attacks. So you find parts of the population that you attack and you make enemies of them, and then you can make the people forget about the general situation of poverty and difficulties. So that has been so much deteriorated that we made a last report this autumn in Parliament, voted with a huge majority that says that Hungary is no more a complete democracy. It is an hybrid democracy or an hybrid autocracy. You can see it one way or the other, meaning that it has a few appearances of democracy, but it's no more completely one. So we've made this assessment in Parliament with a huge majority, but things are still not changing. And I want to recall for everyone that Hungary will have the presidency of the Council in 1 year for 6 months at the beginning of the new term of the Parliament and new term of the Commission in 2024. And a presidency has the possibility of putting things on the agenda. It's a threat for the entire European Union. Hungary's situation, Poland's situation, not only because it can give an example, and some other governments have been trying to copy Orban. There was Janša at one moment in Slovenia. He was thrown out of power, but he did start it. And I am today very, very concerned about one country, which is Greece, where we are starting to see the same sort of building of deterioration and creating enemies and going after activists and journalists and opponents in general. But we also have degrading situation in other countries, and there once you have one country that is a rotten country in the apple, of course you are always afraid of contamination. There's also a sort of a fatigue. I heard about this. We don't know what to do about Hungary anymore. There's also a bit of an habit, sort of we get habit to the worst, and then in France, for example, with all of that happened in the last weeks, the government of France can easily say, yes, but it's not as worse as Hungary. So these are very dangerous trends for European democracy in general. It also, of course, has problems for some of the political decisions of the European Union. You may know that for a number of sanctions against Russia, it was difficult to put in place because Hungary would always oppose it. So it has it's a big danger. And we have difficulties to find the power in council, the courage in council and in commission to react facing that. And this is one of our big concerns. I think the big lesson of Hungary that needs to be heard in other countries is that today authoritarian governments and authoritarian regimes do not come with coup d'etat. They do not come with the army coming in the city. They do not come in that way. They come in a very subtle way. They start gaining powers in a moment of defiance, of big mistrust of democracy, of problems of corruption. They come at that moment through election, and then they will start deteriorating the situation, killing all of the counterpowers, and then they will start the authoritarian trends. This is one of my big concerns for France. If Rassemblement National and Marine Le Pen, for example, but it's only one example, it could be someone else coming to power. We have, with the terrorist attacks, with a number of things about also digital rights and all of this, we have started making derogations to the usual rule of law and making weaknesses in our French system that someone could exploit if he would come to power. So I think this is one of the big alerts that Hungary must show, but also the trend that we've seen in the last year in Greece. Now, authoritarian trends come with people that have a face of Democrats. They come to power. Orban, you have to remember, was a liberal. He was the big opponent to the Soviet Union dictatorship. And then they turn their faces in the years after. So I think this, I would really say that we should be careful about all of this. And just to finish, of course, the Ukraine situation is one that is also creating a paradox for European Union, because, for example, the other big country with a huge problem is Poland. And Poland now has been completely forgotten. We don't talk anymore about the problems in Poland because we want to be united because of the Ukrainian situation, but this is a difficult situation, and we will have these moments more and more in European Union where we will be asked to shut up, because we need to be united facing Russia, facing China, and all of this. So we need to be strong enough to be united, but we need to be also able to deal with our own problems inside of European Union and not always think, Russia and China are the only big threats. And the other thing I wanted to finish, two other things I wanted to finish on. One is this thing in Hungary, in Poland. We've seen it in other countries. When you start attacking the minorities, it is most generally a sign that you will, in the end, want to attack democracy in general. Going for the migrants, going for the LGBTI people, going for the women is often a way of starting to make the population silent and creating enemies inside of the country. And the third thing I wanted to say is that you've talked a lot about inequalities, and of course this is also a major problem in societies where inequalities are there, but also in society where climate justice doesn't exist, where the environment becomes a big anxiety problem. This is moments where societies, of course, become vulnerable, and that's when authoritarian government can install their power. We have a problem today in France, for example, with a lot of young people, all of these young people that have been in the streets for the last month. For some of them, they do not see any more hope in democratic rules and democratic way of finding solutions. And they are more and more saying we need to go through violent actions, even if they are young people, green young people in France saying today, we can even imagine being killed if we need to, because this is the only way we will gain things. Because we have governments that don't listen to us anymore. So these are concerns that are very worrying in our societies.
Muchas gracias, Gwen. Muchas gracias per la teva
Thank you, Gwen, for your very interesting intervention. It's been more than an hour now, but density is like 2 hours. Very interesting. I know you've made an effort to synthesize things, but this has been used to benefit from each second of your participations. Let me just give you a final turn to comment from your final ideas. One question following the same order. Pablo said what Gwen also repeated. one of the sophistications of opponents to current democracy is that they do not want to kill democracy, but rather use democracy in a very sophisticated way. And not only political parties, different actors, different stakeholders, when said that they don't use tanks anymore. Well, in the US, there was a problem with the army, but it was supported by the outgoing president, something that Trump was there. How do you read the fact that the complexity represented by the adversaries and the opponents of democracy are presented as the defenders of democracies? And this is very obvious. And for people who have been activists, is easy to read. It's not so easy to read when an average citizen is vulnerable and highly pressured by information, contradictory information, and the speed of things. Thank you for your question, because this is very complex. Let me start with a simple definition to see if we are facing an electoral authoritarianism or a full democratic system. The definition of Chebosky is very elegant. Something like saying a democratic system is a system where the government may lose elections. That's a very basic definition. But once you know that there are a system where those who are in power cannot be kicked out of power democratically, you realize that this is not a true democracy. This entails many other things: freedom of press, freedom of elections, transparent counterpower. And basically, democracies stemming from all this have three pivots. Electoral democracies, well, generally uncertainty before we vote. We don't know who will win. Whenever someone has won, you accept the result and reproducibility. If you know who's going to win, because you know who is going to win, not because of the polls. And if it doesn't really matter who wins, because those in power will not accept defeat. Or if you vote and elections are cancelled, you are facing a problem. Let me just give you a classical example. Right now, I am reading a book. Napoleon Bonaparte wrote some interesting books. I don't have a Marxist approach. My approach is different, but it's fantastic to see that actually in the conflict between Napoleon III and the National Assembly, you see the same rationale as that could be seen in many different systems: unarmed legislation and an authoritarian person who declared an empire. This same rationale is reproduced once as a tragedy and the other as a farce. We see many farces in many countries. Painful. What is the responsibility, as far as I am concerned, that we all have? And I accept that those of you who are here are Democrats, and that's a good starting point. It's fundamental to take care of institutions, public institutions. This is fundamental. Authoritarian leaders have a greater ease to destroy all the counterpowers, to all the limitations to their authority when the institutions are devaluated and when they are considered as something weak. We saw that in Latin America. We saw that in Poland or Hungary. Judges are liberal agents. They don't respect the popular will. NGOs or external powers are only control NGOs, etc. Well, this is quite an alarming discourse because it's a growing attitude, and we have to be very careful when we maintain the dignity of institutions and understood in a wide sense, not only institutionally, but also the actors that operate there. And I'm very concerned about this when certain left-wing parties instrumentalize the opposition, because some parties, well, I don't expect a good behavior, but once damage is done, it's simpler that the authoritarian party in power can follow the same rationale. And it's there where you have to ask Democrats what to do. We have to be very alert, and I will criticize my own book. There is a famous book by Sanchez Cuenca. It's called Less Liberalism and More Democracy. I cannot see a worse approach. Authoritarian attitudes are growing because, well, saying that there can be an excess of democracy and an excess of liberalism, well, there's no excess. There have to be a combination because power can be filtered by the smallest gaps. We have to be careful. The democratic institutionalization is key. This is done from your neighborhood down to the Parliament of Europe. Well, that was an improvised answer, thank God. Well, Tina, I would ask 1,000 questions to you, but you talked about the dimension of sustainability, the dimension of eco-transition, and currently the agenda of policies on sustainability are right at the core. The European Union had some policies that placed funds in the ecological transition, in the rhetoric, but at the same time, there is a reaction to the centrality of environmental policies. This is expressed not from the marginality, but it's expressed from relevant parties, options of government, not negationists, but relativists. I was surprised to see that in the Netherlands, there's been a new party, the party of farmers, which is a mixture of defense of Dutch farmers, right-wing populism and reivindication of the voice of the people, and they use green as a color. I don't know if you perceive that the positive part of the environmental debate has advanced and progressed so much that the enemies are very strong. This means that we have opponents that are talking not rhetorically, but there are some interests there. So what is your opinion about this? Well, thank you. I will be very brief, but let me make a comment made by what Pablo said, the care on institutions. I know that he includes this, but let me underscore this. It incorporates the public sphere and public conversation, because institutions is not just a matter of the Congress, the Parliament, the City Council, etc. The public sphere as a whole has to be taken care of to take care of democracy. This is very important. We said that before when we talked about civil society. When we talk about intermediaries, we should see that there as an important role to be played by us. And sometimes we are not doing a good job. Relationship between liberalism and democracy. Well, this is the stock of future work. Generate more of this work. Historically, this is the case, but we see that currently one of the deficits in legitimacy of confidence in democracy comes from an excess of liberalism. This is how the European Union managed the crisis with the austerity law. It's a matter of seeing, maybe once and for all, the liberals have to accept that neoliberalism is not liberalism. Maybe that's it. I believe that this kind of things should be deepened because this debate can give us some clues. Answering your question, well, we knew that this was what was going to happen. And fortunately, because this means progress, there is a reaction. But let's deepen on this briefly, because I think it's interesting. The positive part is that, in fact, and I'll give you this information. The year 2019, 2018, I was working, organizing a seminar in the Association of Press, 2018, very short ago, when we had a speaker, a teacher from the Complutense University, Gemma Teso, who had just presented her PhD thesis, and she had been measuring the time devoted not to climate change, but environment in general in Spanish TV stations. 0.19%. 2018, I think that this gives you a clear answer. Just grab a newspaper, open up a radio station, and tell me, when don't you have news, relevant news that has to do about climate change and crisis, drought, on a report that speaks about the increase of temperature? It's a conflict for Tajo Seguro rivers. It's a conflict because of a project of ski stations in the Pyrenees, a new a new extension of the airport in Barcelona. There are reactions. Obviously, this is a historical constant, but two elements to consider. One, eco-transition, as all transitions, has losers, will have losers. That's why we insist so much in the idea of fair transition. And fair transition is what minimizes losers, trying not to have any social justice, supporting those territories and those people who can be attacked by transition. Easier said than done. This can be a problem that needs an eternity. Saudi Arabia should receive extra funds to make eco-transition. Well, you know, they have been affected negatively. But I mean that the law of social justice should be very clear. But there's another idea that is really generating a great deal of attention. We have Gwendoline and other colleagues that are listening to us from Europe. In Spain, Gwendoline and other European countries, we say that Europe has become a strong relative because they defend or they are seen as the defenders whenever we see that there is an attack. So they are just guaranteeing our attitudes and the Europe that we say that is a distant Europe, that is far, that doesn't know that our daily peculiarities in each territory, that have deficits of democratic legitimacy. But as opposed to this, where do conflicts happen? In territories that do not want to have photovoltaic electricity, territories that do not intend to reorganize their watering systems. Well, there's no water to water certain lands in Spain. We have thousands of examples. So eco-transition is problematic whenever it becomes a material, which is in the territory, in the land. And the way we have to defend it is by asking the institution that is distant, that is far, that has a big democratic deficits. Eco-transition, well, maybe another day we can talk about how the eco-transition can endanger democracies, how can it generate some tensions. This is happening in some countries. But eco-transition can't be done without the agreement of the territories, because Europe should be guaranteeing many things. We go back and forth to Europe, but we cannot do that. We need agreements to happen in the territories where things are happening. That's democracy. Otherwise, we are opening the door to two risks: deparallelization of the eco-transition, and two, the emergence of eco-fascist approaches that happened in the 1970s, that existed many years ago. And some echoes are coming back, approaches that say, well, climate change is so important, so determining, so complex, and so urgent that forget about democracy, forget about the democratic decision-making, make decisions and put the police to force to implement this. Well, we find echoes of that attitude because eco-transition, that as we know, requires a deep transformation, cannot be done turning your back on the territories. I don't know if I answered it, but I tried. Synthetically, this is what I had to say. Excellent. Thank you. Eudald, in one way or another, when you talked before, you covered the key element, which is individualism, or the engine of the system towards individualism. I don't know if, well, no one defends liberalism, but liberalism, had a long backlash. Would you say that there is a reaction to individualism? Is the reaction to individualism being politicized? Well, first, let me go back to what we said before. Considering what Pablo said at the beginning of a real democracy, a really existing democracy, I thought about what Cristina said, to talk about compatibility or incompatibility of democracy and liberalism, that we had to consider the effects of the crisis of the year 2008 and how the neoliberalism had changed. David Harvey talked about really existing neoliberalism that doesn't coincide with the fictions that we believed about Newton, Friedman, and company. It has a lot to do with a planning of economy. So we can see in big companies, big monopolies like Amazon. So let's talk about really existing neoliberalism concept, and trying to answer your questions. I believe that part of the problem, what we have seen that has a lot to do with what we just said, is that there has been a deinstitutionalization of subjects that led people to this radical individualism. I was reading the last book published by Barbara Effenright that passed away short ago. She wrote a book with her husband, John Effenright, and she talked about a new professional class, and it has to do with the context. In Spain, the last CIS poll said that we had 70% of the population that identified as middle class, was 10% or less called themselves workers class, and the reduction had happened in the last decades of nearly 1/10 of what in the past was seen. There's been an important reduction. Effenright said how this had to do with the birth of a new class, the sons of those who had been identified as workers class, that probably coincides with this new millennial generation. In one way or another, is growing up in the year 2008 with the crisis, and therefore there's been a loss of expectations, and how this generation that went to university, that studied a career in a master's course, unlike what had happened in their families that probably were or had been unable to do that. When we have this clash of expectations, speaking about a broken promise, and the problem here is to see how the unrest generated by this uncertainty in these institutionalized contexts can be restructured. And here it's important to see discourses as we could find that allow us to approach this unrest under a pathological perspective. Not too long ago, we were celebrating the fact that this syndrome, the burnout syndrome, was recognized as a labor pathology, which is good. But, well, using this through a psychological and psychiatric way, generating a pathology, makes us forget what are the material conditions that lead us to, or lead you to go through a burnout syndrome. And here is where I think we can see some discourses, some attitudes like Mark Fisher said. There is a process of subordination of class or classes. It's very important to see that these discourses are emerging, politicizing things. It has to be the addition of many more things, but well, some people say it's not, you don't need a psychology, but you need a union. This is the rationale of the capacity of recuperating this collective and institutional dimension that can lead to an answer. But it's not so clear that this is happening in international movements that in the last few years have emerged, and that speak about young people who rebelled against the system. It had to do, as I said before, with trying to find not this voice in the system, but rather trying to find ways out from the system. And in China, the tamping movement, which is called a movement that means, laying down. That was the only way that these young people had the way to respond, not doing anything, just laying down. It led to a nihilistic political attitude. And therefore, I think that there are few examples, or the big negation in the US, in places like Starbucks or Amazon, we are seeing the first union movements after many, many struggles with young people. That is not clearly connected to this big negation, but it had to do with the federal help in the post-pandemic moments, which allowed workers to well, in Burger King, that quit working because they had conditions of precariousness that were so big that they required minimum income. But this didn't have, there was no institutionalization. We see this in the new union trainings in these big monopolistic companies. It's a difficult step. And the first step is actually, offering concepts and notions so that we can approach these problems, that many of them are new and that have to do with uncertainty, that have roots, but that respond to a real problem. We have to see what other new forms of institutionalization not to fall in the political individualism that we are led to. Thank you. Gwendoline, you said it before. When I think about the European Union, I think about Brexit, a country that left the European Union due to, as they said, democratic problems. They said that the European Union is not democratic, and those that did not leave, such as Hungary, one leaves, one stays. I don't know which one is more dangerous, because being member of the European Union distorts certain things. Do you think that we are running a risk? We're going through a risk. Do you believe that democratic forces, and the Greens in that respect are clearly democratic, but these democratic forces are strong enough to avoid this tension that have a disaggregating effect, creating two Europes, because some differences in the European Union members are very evident. So do you think that there should be, or there should not be, or do you think that there may be a break out between the two Europes at one point? Thank you.
Okay, so starting by Brexit, I think this is a very good example. So first, the Brexit story is an interesting story because it was based basically on fake news, fake information, not coming from foreign interference or nasty NGOs or nasty people, but from the government itself selling the fact that, for example, some money that was not put in the EU would serve national benefit in social security, or that's in health and all of this. There was a lot of UK fake news created by the government itself, which is very interesting because this is exactly what we are seeing also today in Hungary, where the Hungarian government has made its people believe that EU is putting money to change the sex of the children in school. And it's really something that people believe. We have the same sort of phenomenon as in Russia or in United States, where people have completely bought the government disinformation. So we should never forget that governments are very good on disinformation. It's not always the others. Brexit is also a good example because indeed, I think it has given a very good lesson to far right. You don't go out. Going out is a bad idea. You stay in EU and you distort the system from inside, which is what Meloni is the best example of. I think that that's what Viktor Orban showed to the others. You can stay inside, be in the European market, use the system. It's not only about getting money from EU, because a number of countries don't get that much money. They give as much as they get. But it's also how you use the system in general and how you can take out the substance, the real ideas behind and value and all of this, and you just use the commercial zone, the consumption zone, and you just use the European people as consumers. And I think that Meloni is a very good example, because if you remember, just before she was elected, in the week before, she made all these little videos saying, I'm not going to get out of EU, and I'm interested in EU and all of this. And she has been since then a very reliable partner for all of the other governments, because she wants to show that she belongs to EU on a, once again, marketing point of view, but no more buying the values. So this is a very concerning example. I think this is the real threat. The real threat is member states now thinking we can stay in EU. We don't have to talk about getting out. Even Rassemblement National today doesn't really talk about Frexit. Very little parties do go on speaking about getting out. Poland has also been an example, because with the Ukraine war, the peace party in government in Poland is saying, very good, we want to stay in EU. We want to be with of course, the OTAN, the NATO supervision, but still we want to stay in EU against Russia, but we don't want to have to buy the democratic things. We don't want to buy the fundamental right things. We don't want to obey the rules and the values. We just want the consumption area and the European market. So I think this is a very bad example. And I think that this is much more a problem that today a European Union of two worlds. I think that 10 years ago, we really had a problem between poor and rich country. Today, we can see that a number of topics, we don't have this cut anymore. It's much more subtle. And I think that the real risk is the far right getting what they have always dreamed of, which is this European Union of sovereign countries where everyone takes care of its own stuff on a value point of view, and of course close the doors to migrants and don't do any of the values anymore. Are we strong enough, the Greens? I mean, that's a very difficult question. At least we fight. That's what I can say. We are the ones fighting always. But I think that you've been talking a lot today about climate change. Since I'm in Parliament, I've been working on all of these rule of law issues. But before, as a local councillor or regional councillor in France, I was much more on environmental things. I've been an ecologist since 20 years, and I remember the time when we would be laughed at, and we were told that what we were saying didn't exist, or that we would find solutions, or we were exaggerating the problem and all this. So I think that all the green people, the ecologists, we know that you have to just fight and believe in what you do. And then sometimes the results are there, sometimes they are not there, and you just have to stick at it and go on and go on and go on. And that's what we do for Hungary, but that's also what we do on a number of rule of law issues. I mean, even on Spain, we work on Spain, of course. I mean, the Catalan topic and all of this. Remember, recalling to the member states and to the council that each member state needs to be careful about rule of law, democracy, fundamental rights, and we really never stop. I mean, it's an every week work to be looking at what is happening in all EU, being careful and going back to council, going back to commission and saying, you have to do this, you have to be careful about that. This member state is not being serious on that topic. We have more and more judiciary and police cooperation. This is not scrutinized. It's intergovernmental cooperation. It's not through EU. There's no scrutiny of the parliament, and we have to have ways to scrutinize that. So we fight a lot about this, to scrutinize when there's arrest warrant, when there's cooperation on and our data is given to another country and all of this. We have a number of areas where we need a lot of fight, because for the moment we have a lot of intergovernmental decisions and no more real parliamentary scrutiny. So on all of this, it's an everyday work.
Molt bé, gràcies, Gwen. Bueno,
Thank you so much. When we had to finish at 8, it's really been really worth it. I would like to thank you all, Pablo, Tina, Eudald, and Gwen. You've made a big effort. Your contributions have been excellent. We'll try to inform you about our new or next activity. I don't know if it'll be as dense as this one, but definitely it'll be very, very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.